Welcome to Inflection Point Podcast, where our mantra is cultivating change from the inside out. Join your hosts, Anita Russell, Mavis Bauman, and Gail Hunter, as we create a brave space for conversations about racism, personal transformation, and accountability. Conversation provides a means to dive deeply into your thoughts, ideas, and beliefs, and examine what emerges in your words, actions, and behaviors. The show is a journey towards anti-racism by cultivating change within yourself first and then out into the world. Learn to engage in racial dialogue using 4 tools: courage, conversation, relationship, and accountability. Discover how truth, reconciliation, and healing can emerge from honest and deliberate conversations. Manifest social change right now on Inflection Point Podcast. Thank you and hello. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the newest episode of Inflection Point Podcast. I am your host, Anita Russell, and here's a quick hello from co-hosts Mavis and Gail.
Hi, I'm Mavis Bauman. Happy holidays, everybody.
Hi, I'm Gail Hunter, and yes, happy holidays to all of you.
Yes, absolutely. So if you've been following us, you know we've been talking a little bit about this whole issue of farming, specifically the plight of Black farmers. So we've talked, did a couple of episodes where we really looked at Black farming in the United States. But today we have a really, really special episode because we have a very dear friend of mine and Mavis's, and her name is Phangisile Mtshali, and she is with us all the way from South Africa. So we're going to have a conversation about the plight of Black farmers in South Africa. And I want to start just by a quick introduction to Phangisile. She's a South African farmer, and she's also the director of corporate philanthropy for a major pharmaceutical company. So just very quickly, she was born into a family of farmers. Her paternal grandparents were landlords and active crop farmers at the foot of the Drakensberg mountain range. This is very interesting, she set her mind to owning a farm, a working farm, when she was 7 years old and living on a commercial farm. So she's farmed with broiler chickens, and I had to look that up to find out exactly what a broiler chicken was. Layers for eggs, indigenous goats, raised beef cattle, and most recently she started a pecan nut orchard and has planted 450 trees with a target of 1,000 trees by 2025. Hello, Phangisile. How are you?
I am so fine. Hello, Anita. Hello, Mavis. And hello, Gail. And happy holidays to the listeners and viewers.
Yes, absolutely. It's really exciting for you to be here. We have a history of knowing one another and working together and all of that. So what I thought was maybe we would give our audience a little bit of a hint of how the three of us, you, Mavis, and myself, got connected. So I'm going to give you the pleasure of sharing that story of how the three of us got connected.
Oh, wow. I think it was about 15 years ago. We were both, me and you, working for the pharmaceutical company that I still work for. And we had an opportunity when you were leading the African American Affinity Group. I don't think they call them that now, where your group wanted to do something to reach out to help women in South Africa. And at that time, I was based here in the US, but about to relocate back home. And you led a fantastic program, and you roped in Mavis, who was our photographer throughout. And you and a group about 6 of your members and an oncologist came down to South Africa, where you basically educated our partners in the Ladysmith Utukela district area about breast cancer and cervical cancer. And Anita and Mavis, I have to tell you this, 10 years on, the foundation that I work for has a fully fledged program on breast and cervical cancer, all built on the work that you did in 2008.
It's wonderful to hear. Oh, that trip was
Yes.
just fantastic. Yeah,
Yeah.
very wonderful connection with the women there, especially.
As
Thank you.
Mavis, Gail, and I were preparing for this, we kind of took a step back into, you know, a lot of the things that were happening that led up to us being able to do that trip. And so we were kind of filling Gail in on it. And when I think back on that time, that was undoubtedly one of the high points of my career. And working
Too.
with women in South Africa, and I mean, we just came, they loved on us, they embraced us, and we really functioned as an international team for about a week or so when we were working. And so it was definitely one of the fondest memories that I have of working in corporate America.
You did very well. You did good work. You planted some seeds, and today we are reaping the fruits.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So let's.
No pun intended on farming.
That's good.
Our Phangisile. As again, we were discussing how are we going to do this show and how is it going to unfold. And I realized that there are a number of things that I don't really know about you. And one of those things is, other than when you sent over the bio and I read this short bio of your farming background, I had no idea that it went back to you being a young child. So maybe that's a good place where you can start. It's just to give us some insight into who you are as a farmer.
Thank you very much, Anita. You know, I must also say that I had an opportunity to listen through the podcast where I think it was this month earlier, where you were talking about the whole issue of the land debate and farming in South Africa. And I found myself just identifying threads on what you were talking about. So, you know, first of all, my family name, Mtshali, means the one who plants. Literally. That is my family name. So my grandparents were really, really, really productive farmers. They had 10 children. They educated them through their farming. All of them, they were actually professionals. All my uncles and aunts were professionals. And we had vast swaths of land that I remember as a young child, as a toddler, just running through them. And, you know, we were like a center of the community. And my grandmother, there was also a church going on in our dining room on Sunday. But when it was time to plant or time to harvest, my grandmother would go out and would ring the church bell. And I still have that, like small streams, women from all corners of our village. We were a little bit lower in the valley. So they just came up, lines and lines of them, and they would come, and my grandmother would separate the seeds that have been stored, and they will get onto the fields. And, you know, you've been obviously to my part of the country, and the singing that was going on there, whether it was the planting season, the hoeing seasons, because they used to do that by hand when I was growing up, or the harvesting seasons, which was, of course, always the best. But then I also had an aunt, one of those of the professionals that were there in the generation that I come from. who just had a gift to start schools in farming areas. Now, you may not know this, but if you actually happen to be born in a farm, for a very long time, you had no access to school either, because the farms were just that, and there were no schools that were designated in and around areas. So one of my aunts actually just had that gift her entire life. She just used to go from farm to farm, sometimes being thrown out, sometimes being welcomed. And I tagged along when I was about 6 to that farm school where she was. And I remember running in that farm and just running next to the streams in the forest or through the maize fields that they had. And I said, I want this. I want this. I need to have this when I grow up. So that's where the 7-year-old sort of vision comes from. But all in all, it's something that was instilled in me very early on, looking at how my grandparents were living as farmers.
Excellent, excellent. And so when we were there, you took us to your farm and your cultural center. So can you share with our audience a little bit about what that is? And I'm not even going to pretend like I can pronounce it. Like I heard you say it the other day, but I just could not remember. But when I think back on how we got there, because it was very much a surprise to us. We had no idea where we were going for those last 2 days, and you kept it a secret from us. And then we end up in this beautiful place. So if you could share what that meant to you and how that ties into your farming history as well.
You know, I just have to say, Anita and Mavis, it wasn't quite a secret. You know, that was my home. So I was just taking you home. However, the place is called Kwahlangabeza Cultural Hub, which is one of my clan names. And that name was given to me by this aunt that I've just told you the story about, the one who used to start a school in farms. Because I've always really wanted to own land. Now, you will ask me, why do I have this and I don't say it's my ancestral home? Because back in 1976, 75, 76, we were actually uprooted. So our land was taken. You know, in the previous episode, you were talking about forced removals. I lived through it as a 9-year-old, and I can tell stories if you ever wanted to talk about displacement, organized displacement, but it was displacement. So we actually didn't have any land for a very long time, from about 1976, when we moved into those shanty towns. We had no land, but I still wanted to own a piece of land and actually do some active farming. So that's how Kwahlangabeza came about. I actually bought it. Now listen to this. So our farm was taken away and given to other people, but I had to pay market-related price. And I only did that because it is something that I wanted to do. It wasn't cheap. It wasn't cheap, because it was actually in a very, very fertile valley. It wasn't too far. It was about maybe 30 minutes by car from the commercial farm where I birthed the vision. So, but Kwahlangabeza, as you say, it's a very pretty place. It wasn't not much for farming. It's got hills, it's got valleys. But what I did want to do there was to set up that cultural village that you're talking about, paying homage to my people. So as you recall, the architecture was just like those beehives, thatch roofs. If you are outside, you would think it's very small. You have to bend your head to get in. But I also ran some indigenous goats there, because it is that thornfelt, it's that type of vegetation where goats do very, very well. And on the flip side, why is indigenous goat farming important in my part of the world? It is because it is linked to all the rituals, cultural rituals that my people do. So December is a very busy time because everybody has come back from Johannesburg or the towns, big towns where they work, and they want to either do a Thanksgiving or they want to do something for their dearly departed, and the goat and the animal that they need for these rituals, it's the goats. But also goats are smart. They look after themselves. They eat God's given vegetation. So they were very easy for me, a corporate girl, to farm in. So in a nutshell, that's basically why we had Kwahlangabeza Cultural Hub, which was not just a farming area, but also it's now an agri-tourism destination.
I can't recommend it highly enough. That was just the most thrilling place.
It's such a story of resiliency. Wow.
Thank you.
And as I mentioned earlier, for me personally, the best part was that I just had no idea for going. And you're certainly right. I'm taking you to my home, but I was not expecting what I was, quite frankly, blown away.
Oh, thank you.
The food was amazing and all of that. And so for that being my first experience in Africa, period, it was just, was one of the highlights of my entire life. And I thank you for that, Phangisile and Mavis, for
I do too. When I redid my house, I incorporated some of the elements that you had in your cultural center, you know, the stones in the shower. And I just loved being there. I felt so at home. It was wonderful. Yeah, beautiful.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. So one of the things that really struck me as you were talking, because I, just basically realized earlier today that I didn't know very much of your history and all of that before meeting you when we worked together. And so one of the things that we talked about in our previous episode was the 1913 Land Act and the Group Areas Act of 1950. So can you give us a sense of how that impacted you personally? We've read a lot of different stories and we've read articles and all of that, but I'd like to hear how that really impacted you and your family on a personal level.
We moved from being landlords. We moved from being a family that provides, a family that can educate its young into poverty. When I was born, as I had described about the social standing of my grandparents, I was born in a sort of a modern house, not even like a traditional Zulu homestead where you've got separate homes. Why? Because my mom was from Johannesburg, and having married into this family, he was not going to trudge through the mud from the kitchen to the place of dining. So we had a Western type house. And I lived in there until I was about 8. And when the first remote, but when I was born already, from the time that I opened my eyes, there was always a number on this beautiful home. There was a number that was there already. And I was born in 1967. So there was a number that was there already, which basically was the tallying of all the homes so that they could build a township for us to move into. Okay. And there used to be community meetings. And we were obviously, my family was very much into those where we were trying to resist this forced removal. However, it came. And I think it was just that trauma and all of that just made me more determined than ever that I will have a piece of this country, because it is mine. It is my birthright. Even if you make me buy it, I will have it. And actually, I used to joke, Gail, you work more in that spiritual realm. But I used to joke to say that I'm addicted to land. Because I would be sitting, and if I see a piece of land that I think I can afford, without even viewing that piece of land, I will just buy it. Maybe it was just that subconscious a feeling of just something so fundamental that was taken, that was just ripped off from me. The whole move, Anita, going back to how white supremacy views, they planned it. It was planned. It wasn't an overnight thing. It was planned over decades, and it was implemented as they had planned it. As they had planned it, it was implemented. So come 1976, I find myself with my nucleus family living in a shack, literally a shack, a tin roof. Oh. A tin roof, because when you were forcibly removed, if you were landowners, they already built you like a 3-bedroom house or a 2-bedroom house. But family dynamics, my dad was the 9th born, so didn't quite qualify, according to them, as landowners. So the firstborn got the land. We then ended up in a shack. So this is just to tell you, that's why I started by saying that from being in a family of landowners, of providers, of pillars in the community, we were moved just like that into poverty. It manifested it in many ways. In that, by the way, this was, I was just thinking about it the other day. My mom was also forcibly removed because she was born in Johannesburg and in Sophiatown. So this, in her life, she was actually forcibly removed twice. First, as a young girl of about 7, 8, and then later on as a mother of 5, including her 9-year-old daughter, which was me. So that is basically what I can say about this. And then the distances, we didn't even know where we were going. You could just consider that whole year. We didn't have any schooling, none whatsoever. Because when they start to move people, you see, your teachers are moved already, okay? Because they were doing it section by section. And you are getting there, and we used to run around. All of a sudden, we've got this little backyard where with people that we've never ever known. And I do want to bring this back because one of the things that we had to do out of that grinding poverty for my nucleus family was to sell vegetables. So my mom was a domestic worker, and then she teamed up with this particular lady that they commute with, who worked for a family that owned a vegetable shop. So every Friday they would take out the vegetables, obviously, that are likely to spoil, not quite spoiled, and then they would get them out, and then we would sell the vegetables. And for me, it started just saying that, that this is needed. Food is an area where we need to go, and for about 6 months, that's how we lived. We would get those dishes and we would sell vegetables in this brand new place to make ends meet.
Wow. Phangisile, I just had a thought. It sounds like many communities were destroyed in the process. So all of the networks you had and people you worked with, people you knew, people who knew each other to help each other, all of that was destroyed by putting you in a strange, confined place.
that displacement, again, I talk to you, Gail, because this is, imagine when you are just uprooted and you are now with people that you don't know,
Oh, no.
values that you don't know. Many kids were lost, crime that we saw there. And you know, it was in the middle of winter.
Oh,
It was in the middle of winter for us. So you got it there. If you were a biggish family, it's this tin roof and maybe a tent. And people had never stayed in tents, you know. So tents were burning up here and there because people were trying to keep warm in this strange place where we were. And we had to make new friends. But you know what? The African spirit of Ubuntu, I would say it came through over and over, especially for us. We neighbors that we didn't know, they passed food around. They helped us to organize our tin home. But yes, it was. And for me, what always struck me, apartheid was so unjust. For it to have worked for that long in that manner, it just boggles my mind.
It blows my mind too. I just can't even imagine being a child or an adult and having your entire life being uprooted like that and taken, stolen from you.
Your only
And
assets.
but what they couldn't steal was your spirit, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So it's interesting that you said that, Gail, because as Phangisile was sharing her story, it just struck me the similarities, because we've been doing a lot of this. What are some of the similarities between the African-American experience in the States, and especially when you take it all the way back to slavery and the Atlantic slave trade and all of that? What Phangisile described is exactly the same.
Right.
These individuals experienced being snatched from their homes and being placed in another situation way far away. I was going to say miles, but I mean, what?
Yeah.
And it wasn't that long ago.
No.
So even what was happening in the United States, there was no learning, I mean, I can't say that, that I know that completely, but it doesn't seem like there was any transfer of knowledge and experience about how devastating it is. How could it not matter?
And just all because of, ego states are all very insecure, right? And so the white supremacists who have a very insecure ego state that felt they were entitled to take this land that was yours, right? And then completely uproot everybody as if there was nothing wrong with that. And yet, if anybody came in trying to do that to them,
that would be war.
That's right.
So it's the same story, though, when you think about, just talked about the enslavement, but then also when you think about the indigenous people, there were people
who did the same thing, right? White people did the same thing here.
Exactly. It's the same kind of story over and over again. And the central core piece of it is white supremacy, as Phangisile mentioned. So it's almost time for us to go on a break. So what I'd like to do is continue this conversation of really thinking about those parallels and those things that we see that are similarities between the South African experience and our experience in the United States. So we'll just take a quick break and then we'll be back and continue the conversation. Welcome back. You are listening to Inflection Point podcast on Transformation Talk Radio. And our topic for today is being Black globally, the plight of Black farmers in South Africa. And our guest is Phangisile Mtshali, who happens to be a South African farmer. So why don't we just kind of continue the conversation? We were starting to really kind of think about those parallels between apartheid in South Africa and what we experience as Black folks in the United States. So maybe if we can kind of continue that conversation a little bit.
Yeah, I have a question. So it sounds like for you, Phangisile, that the families were allowed to stay together, right? And stay connected, right? Whereas in the United States, when they brought over the African people, they often split families apart and thought nothing of selling off kids, or selling off a father, selling off a mother. And so the families were not kept intact, right?
Yeah.
But at least, so I'll give them that they at least let your family stay together. Not that that's any consolation whatsoever, but at least emotionally you didn't feel totally alone as a child. Yeah.
You know, maybe the difference is that they in the case of America, they never saw those Africans as human beings.
I know.
They saw them as a resource. They saw them as a commodity to be traded.
Yes. They were free
But
labor.
anyway, with us, it had already happened. You must remember. I keep on talking about my mom. You haven't asked me where my dad was.
Yes,
My dad was in Johannesburg.
That was my next
My
question.
dad was in Johannesburg working. So that separation had already happened for economic reason. You know, the men folks in the farming areas who could not work the land anymore had all gone into Johannesburg or into the mining areas where they were living in hostels, where they were living in subhuman conditions to work. So much as you can, you know, we still stayed as families. Well, at least the mom was there, and we know wherever there is a mom, the hearth is warm, the home is there, but the main folks were not there. They were already taken by the system to go and work in those areas where we couldn't go because of that passbook system that you discussed in the previous episode.
That's right.
So they were assigned jobs as opposed to finding them themselves, like your dad was assigned.
It was a thing to be. It was a thing to be done. You had to go to Johannesburg to work and to earn a living, because you could not earn a living from the land anymore. Okay, so that was the first thing, and it was made to be so lucrative. And it goes back to why maybe you don't see a very strong Black farming community, because farming became unsexy. It wasn't, if you know, they would look at me when I visit my cousins in Johannesburg and they would call me farm girl. You know, it was now not a status thing. You couldn't be there. If you worked the land, if you were a farmer, you were a little bit less than those that were in the urban areas. Rightly so. They had electricity. They had whatever type of amenities that you didn't have in the farm. They had schools. I was just telling you that most people that were in the farms, they didn't have schools. You had to cross rivers. So one farmer will decide, okay, I can host a school here, right? And all the other kids would have to go cross rivers, up the mountains, and you could only, even then, do it for only 6 months, because there was something called a 6 months tenancy, which we all know. They used to call it 6, because for 6 months of the year, members of the families living on the farm had to work for tenancy. So the older, the strongest were taken off school. This even happened in my aunt's schools, you know. So I had kids that I only see 6 months of the year. The other 6 months, they were off there going to work in bus. We used to call them boss, in Boss John or in Boss So-and-so's farm.
So the other, in telling all of that, and that question that you asked Mavis, what does that remind you of? Does that not remind you of the Great Migration in the United States? When it was this influx of people that were leaving the southern states and coming up to the northern states. It's almost the equivalent of people leaving the farmlands in South Africa or being forced out and going to Johannesburg. And that's what I find so intriguing when we look at and listen to these stories and this history, that the parallels are undeniable.
Yeah.
The parallels are there.
The whole white supremacy
That's
agenda flushes out the same way.
that is
The people
Right.
are displaced, but spirits are not killed.
And people of color in the United States were moving up north with the Great Migration to get away from it, hopefully to get to some place of freedom. But for you, Phangisile, you didn't have a choice.
No.
Your people were completely pushed aside and pushed to that place, right?
Yeah,
And just
absolutely.
a different form of slavery. I mean, just a different form of, right, of
But you-
enslavement.
my
Mm.
people during the Great Migration, when they got to the north, they were still met with racism. So it's
Right.
not when they left the South, the racism stayed in the South. It was, they
Oh,
still
no, it
went
was,
through the same types of
yeah.
obstacles from that systemic perspective. And the other thing that connects to what you said, Phangisile, is the idea, because it's the same thing here, the idea of farming being a lower kind of activity or a lower kind of work.
Status.
Same,
Mhm.
lower status, however you want to
Mhm.
frame it. Same kind of thing here. People fleeing the South. I don't want to, I don't want to do farming. I don't want to do all of that. But then at the same time, there's power in the land. What was it? From the land is power. Land is power. That was something that I had read from the Black South African Farmers Association, because it's the same exact phrase and information with the Black farmers in the United States. It's the same thing. Just really understanding that the land represents power, which is the reason why colonialism functioned the way that it did, because they saw the land as power.
And there was no concern or caring for anybody that lived on that land except for the people that wanted to be on that land, right?
Yeah.
And the same thing in South Africa, the same thing here. I mean, entitlement, right?
Yeah.
You know, that's the struggle. We always say the struggle is for the land. And I think in South Africa we lost that plot when we thought that the struggle was only for the right to vote. But and we forgot that the struggle was for the land. It was always for the land. All the wars that have ever been fought,
Right.
it has been about the
Right.
land. And you know, coming back to South African Black farmers, then our government come in and they had this beautiful phrase. You know, it's very nice when you now all of a sudden called an emerging farmer. And this for me was excellent. You know, I've had a farm or a land that I could farm since 1997, but to this date I'm considered an emerging farmer. More than 10 years into it. Why? Because of the resources that are not available. And at one point I applied to buy, and I was going to buy this piece of land with sugarcane and timber and everything, and I was turned down. And the reason I was turned down, I thought it was ridiculous. I still think it was ridiculous. They basically just wrote across that this is not a disadvantaged individual.
Mm.
And it was because of what they were asking. That application was about a year, and there isn't anything that they haven't asked. They wanted to know insurance policies. They wanted to know if I had any investments. They wanted to have my banking statements for a year.
Oh my goodness.
The thing
It's like
is,
redlining
I
here.
provided it all.
Wow.
That was the issue, is that I provided it all
Oh,
Wow.
over a year. So once they sat there and I had provided every single piece of information that
yeah.
the Land Bank of South Africa, which used to give white farmers interest-free loans where they will only start paying by the 5th season.
Right.
Okay, so when the government changed and then we started to apply, all these things were required. And because I made sure that I provided them every piece of document they wanted, they just wrote across my application, this is not a disadvantaged individual. Just to tell you, a Black woman is the most disadvantaged, even in our
Right.
laws.
Right.
Our laws. But because I was just backing everything, I said, I'm going to stay with this. I'm going to stay with it for as long as they want. And you know, at the end, I just went to that head office of the land bank and I said, look at me. What makes you think that I'm not the disadvantaged person, except that I'm beating you at your own game? So just to say that even if you want to go back to the land, Gail and Mavis and Anita, even if you want to go back, you cannot. You cannot.
Right.
You cannot, because there is just so many things that you've got to provide.
They block you. One
Well,
way or the other.
racism is alive and
Yeah.
well, and that's exactly what that's all about, right?
Yeah.
And they did that in the United States too. I mean, they did that here too. But and even if they gave you the land, if they didn't give you the ability to have loans and get the material that you need and the equipment that you needed, it's like not giving you the land. You're not going to be able to use it, right? Yeah.
Otherwise, or you are set up for failure.
Right.
It is actually a narrative that just pains me so much. When Black people go out there all over the world and do their damnedest best with little, and then they do not succeed. And the narrative that comes out of that is that, after all, they are unable to. You know, so that is what pains me most out of all of this, because then you get no role models, then you get no encouragement. But the narrative is just that, look, we gave them a little piece of land, barren as it was, without any working capital, and they failed.
Mm-hmm.
Phangisile, what do you believe? What do you answer?
Phangisile, I want to go back to something that you said earlier. And I think you were alluding to the change from minority rule to majority rule, and Nelson Mandela became the president. You had said something earlier today, but then there was something also that you had said when we were discussing you coming on the show. And it was related, I believe, to what you just said a moment ago, that the focus was on vote and not the land. So can you talk a little bit more about that from that? How did that get missed? It kind of reminds me of in the United States, when you think about Brown versus the Board of Education decision, because the focus was on integration, but the focus wasn't really on education.
You know,
the quality of education, right?
Yeah.
it wasn't missed. And by the way, ladies, I still have to go back to that country now. So don't you be asking me questions that will make me persona non grata. But anyway, it has to be said.
We'll all just have to come with you.
The land question was off the table. It was off the table in those negotiations. It is a debate that is still going on right now. So right now, the rhetoric is expropriation of land without compensation. Because you must remember that even though the white folks, farmers were giving the land so that it can be redistributed, the government was buying that land, sometimes at market value, sometimes at more than market value, for the land to be redistributed. So the white folks were still smiling for the land that they stole.
Yeah.
For the land that they stole. So they
Right.
were still smiling all the way. But our government didn't then package that with saying, if we give you your land back, we will give you working capital. We will give you technical assistance, because farming is technical. Farming is science. You got to know, like I'm learning now, when as I'm establishing my pecan orchard, I got to know which way the wind blows. Okay, so that I can then plant my trees in that way. I have to know how to pace them. I have to know what cultivar to put with what cultivar. Okay? And that is not the information that is there anymore, particularly if you want to farm for a living. You know, you don't just put your trees here and there. And guess who helps me? My white neighbor who has been farming, who comes from that generation of farmers, generations of farmers. So he comes to me the other day, says, I see your crop of trees last year didn't do well. You must understand these soils of ours are like this and like this and like this. When you are planting your next crop, make sure that you get sand. It's clay soil. Make sure that you get sand. So before you put in your roots, he's coming across it and he's giving that knowledge, which I believe, if that was never ever broken, what was in my family, this is information I would have had just like this in my hands. So that is what I want to say, that land question was off the table. It is still off the table. It gets jittery because that's the reality of what it would take for South Africa, for the Black South Africans to say, well, yes, we are here. And you were asking me, Gail, earlier about what do I think is the answer for getting the Black folks interested in farming. First of all, everybody wants to be associated with success. So we need to find those few people that have been farming and they've made a living out of farming, that are breaking into these international export markets. We need to cultivate them. But unfortunately, you will need to be handheld by someone, either by your government having very strong programs that enable you to farm successfully. Then the young people will see value. Actually, we do have some young people that are now going back into the land, that are producing vegetables. And we need to tell those stories on programs like this. Just get those young people, ask them, why did you go back? Then other young people can see value in it, because the land is going to be here. That's why you guys call it a real estate, because it is real. It was here way before, and it's going to be here if we take good care of it.
That's right.
Way after we are gone. So we need the young generations to see farming as sexy, as I say. People must blog about it. People must take pictures on Instagram about why farming is there. After all, we need to eat. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
After all, we need to eat.
Yeah, that's the key.
Human sustainability, right?
Yeah, we all need to eat.
Exactly.
We all need to eat well.
Yes.
And how? Yes, absolutely. So things that I had. You had a comment, Mavis?
Yeah, just real quick. In an article that you resourced us, Anita, it says the people who produce most of the food that South Africans actually eat are thousands of small Black farmers. This woman explained that around 90% of them are women. I found that fascinating, but the title of the article is still 14 million people are hungry. So somebody needs to get out of the way.
The thing is, I have, let me just pick one produce that I know I share on a daily basis, I sell. It's layers, so eggs, right?
Eggs.
So you can definitely say that I contribute to that because I have got a number of people's supermarkets and many other small shops in the peripheral, in the townships, that buy this from me. But so there is that, but it is not enough. It needs to be large scale for it to make a difference. You must remember that we need to create jobs. Those 14 million people, not only because they do not have access to food, they do not have access to money to even buy the food that is there. So we have got, farming for us can get us back to the, we can be more productive, we can create more jobs. Since we've got a very, very high unemployment rate, particularly amongst young people. So there is a lot more that we can do. And yes, many women are waking up, but if you wear a hectare, that's just enough. It's just enough.
Right.
It won't even help you to look after your household.
I just got the message, a 3-minute warning. It's probably 2 minutes by now. So Phangisile, what is those final words or that final message or encouragement or the way you see things unfolding for the future? What is that final thing you would like to leave with our audience?
I would like to say that although the past has dealt us many bad hands, there is really, really hope in the future. We need to make sure that our young people appreciate the land. We've got to make sure that we see farming as an alternative.
Right.
And for our governments everywhere to resource and support those that want to get into farming. That's all I can say.
Yeah.
So I usually finish out with a quote. It's a quote that I've been using quite a bit, and it's becoming sort of that standard. And this is the quote because I use this because it ties all of this together from an anti-racist activation perspective, right? And this is from an organization called Very Well Mind. And it says, anti-racism is a process of actively identifying and opposing racism. The goal of anti-racism is to challenge racism and actively change the policies, behaviors, and beliefs that perpetuate racist ideas and outcomes. Anti-racism is rooted in action.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that pretty much says it all.
Yes.
We probably are down to like 10 seconds at this point. So I would just like to thank the audience for joining us. And Phangisile, thank you for blessing us with your
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely.
It's been wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah, I'm so grateful to finally meet you. I've heard so many wonderful things about you, and they all are true. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Gail. Thank you.
So to the audience, I'd just like to say thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time at Inflection Point Podcast here on Transformation Talk Radio. We are here every first and third Wednesday at 3 p.m. Pacific time and 6 p.m. Eastern time, and we'll see you in our next conversation. Thank you for listening to Inflection Point Podcast, where our mantra is cultivating change from the inside out. The journey towards anti-racism and social change doesn't stop here. Truth, reconciliation, and healing come from ongoing, open, honest, and deliberate conversations. Continue to dive in and deconstruct your thoughts, ideas, and beliefs as we band together to manifest social change. Tune in to Inflection Point Podcast every first and third Wednesday at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, here on TransformationTalkRadio.com for more conversations about how we can cultivate change from the inside out.